So thank you very much for joining this afternoon. It's an opportunity to talk about women's issues in Sri Lanka. It's an extremely important topic for a country like Sri Lanka. Um, so I'd like to explain why it's particularly important for Sri Lanka as we go along. So International Women's Day is coming up. That's on Saturday, the 8th of March. So this is like a prequel to that date. Um, we are organizing a number of events ourselves, and also one of our associated organizations is also organizing a very important event to celebrate International Women's Day. So I'd like to begin by talking to you about what female empowerment is. You hear of female empowerment, but what is it exactly? It's not feminism. So what it isn't is it's not about feminism, and it's certainly not about militancy or getting into a gender conflict with men. That's not what female empowerment is about. It's about encouraging women and girls to gain the skills and knowledge to enable them to overcome obstacles in their day-to-day lives and at work, and ultimately learn to develop within themselves and also in society. That's what female empowerment is about. So there are so many issues for women globally. We're more than half the population of the world. But what are the issues particular to Sri Lanka? That's what we'd like to discover as we go along today. And why is it important to talk about women's issues? In the context of gender equality, gender parity refers to the equal contribution of women and men to every dimension of life, whether private or public. But why particularly about women's issues? As we go along, I hope you'll see that there are specific issues relating to women that it's very important to look at and do something about them. So there's this concept of the superwoman in the West, especially juggling work, family, and all other commitments every day. But in the West, the biggest issues tend to be quality of treatment at work. Do you have equal pay? Is there a glass ceiling that you just can't get through? Those are the main concerns in the West. But there are some parts of the world where women don't have the most basic and fundamental of rights that we take for granted when we're living in the West. So to look at some of the universal women's issues, there's equality and empowerment, there's juggling work and home, access to education, women's health issues, safety, gender-based violence and persecution, representation in politics, childbearing and childcare. So there are so many issues relating to women. But the point is, in certain parts of the world, girls and women don't have any of the basic rights that we take for granted. In some parts of the world, there's no right to work at all, or the right to go to school or university, to wear what you like, or to own your own home, hold a bank account, or equal rights to inheritance, and the right to marry at the age that you want to marry, and marry the person that you want to marry, to make decisions and have opinions about your own children, to be safe from violence, both physical and sexual, the right to health. Women are denied this, and to enter a cemetery even, or to attend your place of worship. Women are denied even these basic rights, and the right to vote, the right to represent others, other women, other people in your own parliament. And most shockingly, even the right to life. Women don't have this. So this is why it's important to discuss issues related to women. So you might think, it can't be this bad in Sri Lanka, surely. We've had a female prime minister, the first world's female prime minister. There are lots of women going out and about working. What's the problem? Well, rights of women do vary from one country to another, but very, very, very few countries can claim to have almost perfect gender parity. In the global north, as I said, it's mostly about gender pay gaps and glass ceilings. But as you've seen, the issues can stretch from the right to vote right through to the right to life itself. So these are problems that are universal. But what about Sri Lanka? If you look at financial independence and inclusion, to my mind, this is one of the most important: financial inclusion and independence. Now, if you don't have a job, you don't have a source of income, if you're not able to maintain a bank account and access loans, you can't get anything done. So you then become hugely dependent on somebody else to provide for you. So your existence is reliant on somebody else's will. And if that is misused, then you become a complete slave to that. So this is why financial inclusion is incredibly important. Financial independence is incredibly important. So there was this study done by the International Finance Corporation World Bank Group, and I've put in URLs for all the references that I've made in this, and I can make those available for anybody who's interested in a PDF. So women in Sri Lanka, they found, have achieved high levels of human development and education, which is fantastic. But it's surprising that there are gaps in their progression. For example, majority of Sri Lankan women still rely on informal financial sector for their financial needs. They'll borrow from relatives and put their money under a mattress. So these are kind of, they might not strike you as being particularly important compared with some of the other issues faced by women elsewhere in the world, but this is enslaving to some women. I'm not saying it's an issue for all women, but it could be quite a serious problem. And although women comprise of more than 51% of the population, the participation in paid workforce, participation in the labor force is much lower than that of men. In 2018, it was 33%, and compared to 73% of men in work. But that's still very much the same figures. If anything, it's got lower. It's somewhere about 31%. So the problem is that the country is going through a significant demographic transition because of its low fertility rate. And within the next 25 years, the population will be over 60. The population over 60 will double, but the working population will fall. So because of these shifts, it's critical to increase female labor force participation to ensure that there's economic growth in Sri Lanka. I hope that you'll see that this is such an important issue, and it's a time bomb. So that's why we need to talk about labor force participation for women. There are other issues like women's safety, gender-based violence. So just take the example of a woman on public transport in Sri Lanka. There was a study done on this. They're subjected to constant sexual harassment. And this showed that 90% of women who were questioned said they were affected in some way by sexual harassment on public transport in Sri Lanka. So this is quite a shocking figure, and people joke about this sort of thing, but it's no joking matter, because if you can't get to work on a train or a bus, then again, women are deprived the right to earn a living for themselves, to be financially independent. So it also affects their physical as well as psychological well-being. And the kinds of harassment that you might face, it's not just little things, and they might start from lewd comments or catcalls or leering or whatever, but it could be much, much more serious than that as well. And this is on public transport. So it's a very serious issue that needs to be addressed. That's in public places. But gender-based violence is something that 1 in 3 women suffer throughout the world. So that's quite a shocking figure when you think about it. This is why we need to talk about it. So it affects physical health, psychological health, emotional health. And the Women's Wellbeing Survey of 2019, that revealed that 2 in 5, this looked particularly at intimate partner violence. It revealed that 2 in 5 women, that's 39, nearly 40% of women, have experienced physical, sexual, emotional, or economic violence or controlling behaviors by a partner. And this is quite worrying because this is in their day-to-day lives, in their own homes. The most common form of violence is controlling behavior. So about 19%, they can't make decisions about their own lives because their intimate partners, they run everything for them, or they take over, basically. That controlling behavior, coercive behavior, is very, very serious and can be very damaging. And then physical violence is the second most common form of violence. So if 1 in 5 women are suffering this in Sri Lanka, then this is even more worrying. They also found that violence against women and girls are driven by societal norms and attitudes, which prevent women from actually talking about them, because they think that it's taboo to discuss problems in the home. And it then perpetuates itself, because then it becomes quite acceptable for men and boys to abuse their partners. And to such an extent that women begin to agree that it's okay. And there are 2 in 5 women who say that women are obliged to have sex with their husbands, whether they want it or not. And 1/3 of women say that men have a good reason to hit their wives. So that's even more shocking, that it's perfectly all right for their partners to hit them. And women begin to accept this over time. If you look at Afghanistan, I'm not saying that Sri Lanka is going to disintegrate into Afghanistan, where girls don't even have the right to go to school, or they're hidden behind closed doors. But there was a time in Afghanistan where women were perfectly free, where they were actually, well, perhaps not perfectly, but they certainly had judges and doctors and all sorts of people in high positions who are women. But look at it now. So unless we're very careful, we can go in the wrong direction with this. So as a part of this survey, one of the counselors related one tale, one account. She said that I met a woman who had been married for 10 years, and within those 10 years, she'd faced it all. She'd been raped by her husband, she'd been thrown into a well, she'd been forced to abort against her will twice. She wasn't allowed to interact with any friends or family, and she even had to look after another woman that her husband had impregnated during his many affairs. So despite all of this 35-year-old woman had suffered in silence for an entire decade. So you can see how women are forced into submission. I'm not saying every woman in Sri Lanka is in this position. I'm just saying that there are too many for us to take serious concern and do something about it. So in terms of issues, For women in particular, there's early marriage, there's forced marriage. There may be other harmful practices. There's emotional abuse, the controlling behavior, the coercive behavior. They may be subject to human trafficking. And there's also period poverty because they don't have access to sanitary ware, which means that girls then miss school. And then it's self-perpetuating because if a girl misses 1 week of school every month, that's many weeks every year during school term time. So you can see how little by little women are marginalized and pushed into sidelined. So in terms of early marriage, in some countries, fathers can get permission for their daughters to be married off even younger than 13. In other countries, there are customary practices which make early marriage very normal. 9-year-old girls being married off to 60-year-old men. That seems to be normal in some countries. This means that children, girls who are children, their safety is at risk because they can become mothers whilst they themselves are very young children. There's an account, a BBC report by Saroj Patharina, one of our directors, on called The Wounded Victims of Sri Lanka's Child Marriage Law. In Sri Lanka, the general law says that the minimum age for marriage is 18. But the community law, the customary law, means that Muslim girls can get married at much younger age. And this is very worrying because they're forced into marriage against their will. So you'll see that the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act, it compels Muslims to marry under these provisions, and it denies them access to the general law. So there's no provision for women to place their signature or thumbprint to express their consent to the marriage, because it's a close male guardian, who's the wali, who provides consent for the bride. And there are unequal provisions in terms of divorce as well. But the most worrying side of this is the minimum age of marriage, which means that a girl under the age of 12 could be registered for marriage by a wali. And there's therefore no minimum age for girls in the Muslim community in Sri Lanka. Representation in politics. That's another very serious issue in Sri Lanka. Although women are more than 50% of the world's population, in many countries, especially in Sri Lanka, they're underrepresented in the national parliament. There are various international instruments that Sri Lanka has signed up to, but that's all very well. We've actually got a constitution that guarantees equality of treatment. But does that happen in practice? I'll look a little bit later about some of the actual figures. But food security and poverty is a real serious issue, and this affects women in rural areas as well as in urban areas. And there are about a quarter of Sri Lankans living below the poverty line in 2023. I don't imagine it's gotten very much better. There's VAT that you might think affects everybody, but it affects women disproportionately because food prices are affected. So if you impose VAT on food, then that disproportionately affects women, female-led households. Labor participation. We've talked about that already. So lack of access to finance being a really serious problem. There's unemployment rates, much higher proportion of women unemployed. So we talked about gender violence, gender-based violence. We've talked about food security. We've talked about a lot of things. But going back to the topic of representation in parliament, if you look at this is a 2019 survey of 193 countries that have been classified, and the number of women being represented in their national parliaments. You'll see the rank on the left, the country, and then the percentage of women being represented. You'll see where Sri Lanka sits in that. It's 182nd. And you'll see its close neighbors in terms of percentages. Sri Lanka's got 5.3% of women in parliament. And yet they're more than 51% of the population. You'll see that their close companions are countries like Iran and Kuwait, Oman, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iraq. So when you think about that and you look at the actual figures for places like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, their representation is actually much higher than Sri Lanka. Why is that? In 2023, it's still the same proportion of seats held by women in parliament. If you focus on nothing but this, if you can take this away today, then I think we will have achieved a main aim of communicating the biggest issue in terms of gender equality. Inclusive green economic growth that benefits all of society is an essential component of sustainable prosperity, social cohesion, competitiveness, and geopolitical stability. Gender equality and equal rights are not just a matter of equity, they're also paramount economic importance. Research from the International Monetary Fund suggests that narrowing the gender gap in labor markets could increase GDP in emerging markets and developing economies by almost 8%. Gains from fully closing the gender gap would be even higher, lifting GDP in those countries by 23% on average. Simply put, diversity and an equal role for women in the economy, in decision-making, and in policy debates bring better results, mobilizing all available talent, maximizes productivity and competitiveness, which will be crucial for addressing climate change and promoting global prosperity. If you apply this to Sri Lanka, where we saw that those aged 60 or over will double in the next 25 years, and the proportion of people in gainful employment will actually reduce, will contract. With that in mind, if we have only 30% of women participating in the labor force, where will that leave Sri Lanka? This is why it's critical. So we formed a community interest company called Solar Village SDG. And the objectives of this, it's a social enterprise. The objectives are to promote renewable energy on the one hand, promoting using the platform, the concept that's been developed by Professor Dharmadasa of Solar Villages, but also to promote sustainable development, to empower rural lives, not just rural lives, but the lives of anybody who's struggling. And the focus is Sri Lanka. We really want to try and promote renewable energy and sustainable development in Sri Lanka. And so we've got just upcoming events on the 8th of March. There's a flyer here for the events that we are organizing. If you can take just a few seconds to scan the QR code that's there, you'll see that we're planning an event called FemPower Sri Lanka. It's an online event, and we will continue this discussion with a fantastic panel of leading ladies from Sri Lanka. And that's on the 8th of March at 12:30 till 2 o'clock online, and registration is through Eventbrite. But on the same day, on Saturday, the 8th of March, we're also holding a bazaar, Solar Village Bazaar, and that'll take place at once in Sri Lanka as well as in the UK. In the UK, it'll take place at Harrow Baptist Church in Harrow on the Hill, and that will be from 11:30 till 3:30 p.m. on the 8th of March. And those attending the bazaar can actually participate in or watch the proceedings of the online event called FemPower Sri Lanka there, because we'll have some seats available for people to watch it on a TV screen there. On the same day in Sri Lanka, at the Agamethi School, which is our model school, we will be holding a bazaar at the school itself. That's from 10 a.m. in the morning till 12 noon. But in the evening, they will gather at the smart room at the school to participate in or to watch the proceedings of the FemPower Sri Lanka online event. So I hope that's there's a lot going on. I hope it's clear that there are 3 events all happening on the same day in Sri Lanka and in the UK. The 2 bazaars, twin bazaars, plus an online event. Sri Lanka time it's 6 p.m. UK time it's lunchtime, 12:30 p.m. for the online event called FemPower Sri Lanka. So the twin bazaar events on the Saturday, the 8th of March, in the UK at Harrow Baptist Church. You'll see that they're happening because of the different time zones happening at different times. But the online event is obviously all happening at the same time, but 2 different times in for the bazaar. Now, the online event, we've got a fantastic panel of leading ladies from Sri Lanka. Our keynote speaker is Kasturi Chelaraja. She's the Chief Operating Officer at this amazing corporation. She was also one of the first women to be the head of a conglomerate group of companies in Sri Lanka. And so she's going to be our keynote speaker. There are 4 other leading, exciting speakers on the day. We'll be providing more information about that on our Eventbrite link. So please use this QR code to scan this, so that should take you to the Eventbrite link. You'll see that when you scan this, it might take you to an advert first, but you need to click on the grayed out bit to reach the Eventbrite link. This is the Eventbrite link. If you just search for Eventbrite in Eventbrite, just search for FemPower Sri Lanka, and for whatever reason, if the QR code doesn't work, it should take you to the registration page. So that's the online event on Saturday, 8th of March at 12:30 to 2 p.m. Please join us for the Leading Ladies panel event. A week later, on Saturday, the 15th of March, our associates, APSL UK, I'm a member of that organization also, we're holding an in-person event at Imperial College London. That's from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And there we've got 2 really exciting ladies who will speak slightly different but very important and related topics. Still in celebration of International Women's Day, there's Dr. Radhika Kumaraswamy, who's a diplomat and a human rights advocate, the chairperson of Human Rights Commission in Sri Lanka, a special reporter against violence against women for the UN. And there's also Professor Maheshi Ramasamy of Oxford University, who developed the vaccine against COVID-19. So it should be a really exciting event again. And that's on Saturday, the 15th of March at 2 to 6 p.m. at Imperial College London. So there are lots of events coming up. On Saturday, the 8th of March, that's Solar Villages DG organizing the bazaars and the online panel event, plus this from APSL UK on Saturday, the 15th. We hope that as many people as possible will join this. Please tell your friends and all your contacts. So just going back to the general issues relating to women, Sri Lanka's actually signed and ratified CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So if it has, we've signed up to all these international conventions, we've got a constitution that guarantees equality and protection for women. There are lots of laws, national laws that actually protect women. Then why is this still happening? Why is it still an issue? I think it's to do with societal attitudes. So that's self-perpetuating attitudes. So I think we need to really think about it and see what we can do about it. But I'd like to end on a more positive note. There are so many inspirational women. There's soft power from people like Mother Teresa. There is the brain power from people like Eleanor Roosevelt. She advocated for and expanded the roles for women in the workplace. And she pushed for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this is such an important international instrument and contains so many provisions that laid the foundations of human rights laws throughout the entire world. So one woman has changed the human rights history and left a lasting legacy as Eleanor Roosevelt. There are many, many laws that are available, as we just mentioned, but it's societal attitudes that must change. There are so many women of valor through the ages. These are all women who contributed to society in such meaningful ways. And there are so many inspirational women and girls, very, very able women and girls who've made such a difference. There are women who've reached for the skies. There's nothing a woman can't do, but we've got this the dream gap where young girls don't get the science toys. They don't get the little motor cars that they can move about and see how the wheels turn. They get the doll. So if we condition little girls into that role from a very young age, and they don't have exposure to the science toys, or they're not encouraged to do the maths, the STEM subjects, then it's normal that they're channeled into certain roles and certain things in life. So it's really important to change our attitudes. And we mustn't think that anyone's too small. No voice is too small to be heard. And Greta Thunberg is a perfect example of it. This young child who's now being heard by the entire world, better than many politicians, international politicians. So I hope that if women of Sri Lanka can be given the opportunity, they too can make enormous contributions to the world. They do already, some people, some women, but if all women in Sri Lanka are given that opportunity, they'll be empowered to take up opportunities that they really deserve. So that's all I wanted to say by way of presentation. I really hope that that's given some things to think about. I'd like to now throw it open for people to discuss, raise questions, exchange ideas.
Hi, Nilmini.
Hi.
Yeah, no, first of all, can I say fascinating presentation, very informative, really well done. I learned a lot from your presentation. So I think a couple of salient points, there were so many that you made, but one of the things I'd really like to pick up is you mentioned the demographic transition. So clearly, yes, there's a absolute necessity for all members of society to productively, have a role in the economy. But I was curious to understand the current participation of women. I think you mentioned something like 30%. What was that statistic, or where did that come from? I think, yeah, 30% of women, that seems fairly low. So just wanted to understand that a bit more. I was surprised by that. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. The World Bank has statistics on this, and the UN has statistics on this. The Sri Lankan government has statistics on this, and they put the current rates of labor force participation from females at about 32% thereabouts,
I
which
see.
is incredibly low, given that more than half the population is female.
Yes.
It's worryingly low.
So one of the things that Sri Lanka is very or takes a lot of pride in is the very high literacy rate for women across the world. We like to see ourselves, as quite advanced in terms of human development, as opposed to economic growth, where we aren't that great. So two things come to mind. Has there been any increase in that percentage of women participating in the labor force over time? That's one question. And also quite shocked about the parliamentary participation. You said, we are sort of a bit other countries like, or even, even not as good as Iran and Yemen and Saudi Arabia. I mean, why do you think that is so? So two questions there. One, do you see an improvement in the labor force participation of women, especially because the educational levels, literacy levels are so high? And the second question being, yeah, you're thinking about why parliamentary representation is so poor.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, based on what I've looked at from 2019 up till today, labor force participation has remained pretty much the same. If anything, I understand from what I've seen and from what I recall, if anything, it's dropped by about a percentage or so. So that's, if anything, it's actually getting worse in terms of labor force participation. In terms of representation in Parliament, 5.3%, again, that stayed the same. And yet the literacy levels are on a par. And if in many instances, university education of girls, it's actually slightly higher than men as well.
So I think that's a really interesting insight there for me, and something I want to explore, even in the event that's coming up for me is why then, if education is so high and we're world recognized for that, why is that not translating into higher workforce participation and higher work and higher parliamentary representation? So yes.
Precisely. And the answer I've had from a handful of, if they are representative or not, I'm not sure, of Sri Lankan males is that, well, it's cultural, it's our culture. So our culture appears to be one of educating our girls, getting them to work really hard in their academics, get that sticker that you can put on the wall, and then they get married off, and then they stay at home. I've actually had anecdotal experience, obviously, not necessarily mean it's representative across the board, but I've heard very educated men say to me, I don't want my wife to work. I'm the provider. So it's almost like a status symbol. It's become so normal, acceptable for the woman to stay at home and do the child rearing. And then it makes them hugely dependent on the men financially and in every possible way. And that then encourages the perpetuation of these attitudes and also the potential for abuse of that dominant position of the male in the household. It then opens up the potential for domestic violence, for coercive control. And so it goes on and on and on. So this is to break away from that. How do we change the society's attitudes?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Ajit, you're right.
I think it's important to raise that awareness, isn't it? I mean, that is again We need to understand better, and what is it that we can do to address that next step, which is we're educating the women, but we're not seeing the value addition for whatever reason. I mean, you obviously mentioned one of the reasons, the cultural issues, but that needs to be addressed.
I mean, this is where I'm quite worried about going down this, oh, it's our culture path, because that's probably how the Taliban is getting power in Afghanistan. You know, as I said, over there were women who were in the professions and leading in professions, and their representation of women in parliament, well, before the Taliban takeover, was quite high. In fact, it was much higher than Sri Lanka currently. So it then kind of makes you wonder, where are we heading exactly? I mean, there is a time bomb ticking away in terms of our growth. As I mentioned, aging population, not enough women going into work. So those two elements combined in a few years' time, it's going to be so dangerous for Sri Lanka's economy. I mean, as it is, it's in a pretty poor state. So we've got to really shift our mentality, shift our thinking. And I think maybe a solution is to start in the schools, start young, teach the next generation at least that, boys and girls, there should be no difference in terms of their independence, financial independence, and their working rights, just as much as they're achieving well in academics.
Great. Thank you very much, Nilmini, for your response. Again, very informative.
Thank you, Gahantha. That's very helpful questions. Yes, Jivananda, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Nilmini. That's a very illuminating talk. You touched on very important points that probably are not well aware of in the society. So as you said, this is just not a women's problem. This is a societal problem that we have to convince the Sri Lankan population that this is not just women's problem. This affects our entire society. And so there we need for that for us to accomplish that, I think we need male participation as well.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, the male seems to just step outside, stay outside and watch this, thinking, this is a women's problem, let them sort out. That's not going to work. So the two men who are listening out there, I would like to say this is their problem, our problem as well. So we need to step out and talk and do something that, do whatever is necessary to get out of this situation. So unfortunately, our society is a male-dominant society, and there are cultural aspects leading to that, and also, I hate to say this, there are significant religious elements as well. Now, Nilmini pointed out the Islamic influence, but I hate to say this, but Buddhism plays even a worse role in promoting this male dominance. Now, there are some, especially some young monks, I will get into trouble for saying this, but I don't care. Young monks who don't understand the Buddha's teaching, and they think that, females are inferior to males, that only the males can achieve liberation and whatnot. They are completely misguided. And then unfortunately, they have in Sri Lanka, the females are more religious than males. So they have a much higher influence on sort of subduing the female population by saying that, hey, giving the impression that, you are inferior to male. So that has to be changed. And then the third one I see is that, the Gihan addressed that, the literary rate is so high, why it doesn't reflect in the employment scenario. Sure, the literary rate is high. That means, unfortunately, our education system is such that we may be able to read and write, but does our education system encourage the rational thinking? That's a huge problem. Especially the current system is geared just to pass an exam, not only the government education system, but the tuition system, which probably is more predominant than the government education system, more influential. They just train kids to pass an exam, but it doesn't encourage them to think critically, whether it's social problem or even a scientific problem. They just answer, they go through the past papers and they can regurgitate the old answers, but they have no thinking power. So we have to encourage people to think rationally. Why are we in this situation, and how can we get out of this situation? So there are a lot of things to do, and the bottom line is that we have to recognize this as Nilmini pointed out, this is going to get worse. It is a social problem. It's a country's problem, not just women's problem. So the entire society has to get involved. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Jivananda, because you touched on some incredibly important points. It is a societal problem, and we can't solve this without the support of the men. We need the male members of society to work with us on this. We need our fathers, our brothers, our sons to participate in making sure that their mothers, their wives, their sisters, their daughters, that they're empowered, that they're not suppressed, that they are allowed, if I may use the word allow, to participate in life, in that they can make their own decisions. But this control issue seems to be a problem. The man needing to be the provider, the man needing to make the decisions, and women giving way to that, because it's our culture, apparently. So, I mean, that's really worrying that if we keep conceding into this way of thinking, and the way things are going with an aging population, lack of female labor force participation, despite the education levels, it's really worrying for a country as a whole. And as you mentioned, there are issues relating to religion, and it's not exclusively limited to the Muslim faith. And you're quite right. It's perpetuating in all faiths in Sri Lanka, and sadly elsewhere in the world as well. But this is more worrying, I think, in Sri Lanka. And it's certainly of interest to all of us, because that's our country. So a shift in attitudes, but how do we achieve that is the next question. But Dharme, I know Professor Dharmadas has got a comment to make. Please go ahead, Dharme.
Yeah, thank you, Nilmini. Thank you for the presentation and the comments from Gihanta and Jivananda. There is a comment here saying that husbands and parents do not want their wives or daughters to enter the workforce. I will start from here. But because of the real poverty in the country, there are so many wives and daughters going to Middle East. And if you look at the figures during the last few years, the highest income was from that workforce. One time it came as the number one income or number two income, whatever it is, all that money came to the country were abused by our rulers to use luxury cars for themselves, to improve their luxury accommodations and other wasteful activities. Can you see how they used even a small fraction of that money to reduce poverty? Because these ladies go to Middle East, leaving their children and young babies. It is not easy to do that. But it is the attitude, it is the poor attitude of our rulers. We mentioned about this number of women MPs. There is a note here. There are 21 women MPs in our new parliament. I guess this is the largest number. Hopefully, in the future, this will increase, then that poor attitude will gradually change. I think we have to work towards it. And until we change that poor attitude, things will not improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharme. Yes, corruption is a huge problem in Sri Lanka. I agree that that's a giant issue. And you mentioned, I think, 21 MPs in the current parliament. That's out of 225. I just want to understand the statistics a bit better. So it doesn't sound as though the parliamentary representations we're yet there in terms of parity. So we're still a long way off there too.
Yeah, perhaps better than before.
Yes, slightly better.
Slightly better than
Slightly
before.
better.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Chandni, you've got a question, I believe. Go ahead. Thank you for that, Dharme.
Yeah, hi Nilmini. Yeah, so you made a very comprehensive presentation that touch all the areas, and the comments are also so far received. I think highlighted many things, just the attitudes, all these things, culture, everything matter. But other than that, I think there are a number of structural issues which are really a disadvantage for the women. So like the caregiving is one of the main issues faced by women. Even the statistics you presented, I think when calculating the labor force participation, the care services, particularly the unpaid care services, is not considered when assessing their participation in the labor force. And the men also really wanted women to be at home, I think, considering the caregiving issues. So, the structural barriers also, I think, reinforce such things like, as you clearly pointed out, transport issues. So women face a lot of issues due to many problems in the public transport, and at the same time, other kind of institutional kind of things like, so I'm working at a university, so in my faculty now, the student population, more than 80% now girls. But still there are student union, very few girls representing. The main issue is that the 20% is running the faculty, the student union and all, though the number is high, because issues like, so if I give you example here, the girls, they are expected to be at the university hostel by 8 p.m. So if they come after 8 p.m., so then they are not allowed to enter the hostel. But boys, anytime they can enter the hostels and all. So why it is that? Because the system may be recognized that the vulnerable position of the women, so therefore they are expected to come early to the hostel and so on. So the boys says that, so you can't involve politics because so you can't stay after 8 p.m. So if you are involved in politics, so you have to actively participate and you have to do many things. You have to prepare posters and all these things. So we have to do it, in the midnight. So you can't participate. So, but I am trying to explain here is that, yeah, there are many issues, certain things policy related. So still country lack proper care services. So totally depend on the informal care services. So the predominant, I think, burden come to women. And you touch the aging issue also. I think the country not even think about it. We will have a lot of issues very soon because we are not, properly prepared to face such challenges. So the main issue is gender-related issues.
Yes.
Yeah, just a comment.
Chandini, that's really, really valuable contribution you've made. Thank you for those comments. And it's quite shocking to hear about what's happening at the university, that 80% are female, and yet the 20% are representing, and they're being excluded for their own good. I mean, that sounds a little warped kind of thinking there. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot that those girls can do, and to deny them entry to the hostel after 8 p.m. Well, what does that mean? That if they're a little bit late, that they're not allowed back into the hostel, exposing them to more danger? I don't quite understand that rationale going on there at the Students' Union. And certainly there must be huge contributions the girls can do from wherever they are. I mean, much of the work can be done remotely these days, and even the boys can work remotely with the girls, surely. So that's quite odd way of looking at representation at the Students' Union. I hope they'll they'll change their views on that and enable. I hate to use the word allow, because I don't think we need permission from the boys to participate in these things. I think it's a given right that they should represent themselves. But hopefully those attitudes will change. And you make the really valid point there about the caregiving. So the traditional role of the woman as the caregiver in the home, obviously it's liberating the man to go out and earn, because the woman's at home with the children or looking after the husband's parents as well as her own parents. But yet that kind of perpetuates that dependency, the financial dependency. So there's no way out for those women. And that's the problem. Apart from the societal issues, apart from the danger to society in keeping the women out of the workforce, it's on an individual level, it's hugely troublesome for the women involved, because they're stuck. If there's domestic violence, if intimate partner violence, that coercive control we talked about, she has no choice. She's stuck, isn't she? Roshini, would you like to expand on your comment in the chat? In terms of let's just go back to what you said. The sexual harassment in not only in transport but also in the workplace. And is there anything being done about it by the employers? Are you still on the call, Rishni? Or would somebody else like to pick up on that? I mean, we've got laws in Sri Lanka, right, protecting women from violence, from harassment. But why are these not being applied on a day-to-day basis out in society is the question. And we saw even in relation to the Muslim girls, you know, and there might be, they don't have the right to refuse marriage, but if there is ever an issue, the police themselves don't help them. So that's another problem.
Nilmini, we have more than enough laws in the country. Implementation is the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So where do we begin is the question. That's the question for our discussion. Where do we start to chip away at this?
Establishing good governance.
Yeah. I mean, you know, to begin that process, to establish good governance, I know it's important to have the legal framework there, and sometimes changes to the laws can affect changes if there's a penalty attached to it. But then you have to implement the penalty then. Say, for example, the Race Relations Equality Act in the UK, Race Relations Act, they were pieces of legislation, but it's the penalty behind it and the enforcement behind it that forces people, employers, and others to comply with those laws. And little by little, society changes. Sorry, Gantha, you had another comment.
Yes, I think no, governance is important, but I think also back to Jivananda's point, I think men need to be part of this effort. So I think the first thing perhaps is to raise awareness. It's like what you're doing today, and you need to raise awareness and sort of educate people, men and women, about the pinch points and say, look, this is what it is, and really actively get men to come on board with what needs to be done. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And again, thanks to Jivananda for making that point earlier.
Yeah, quite right, Gantha. Awareness, raising awareness.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for that, Gantha. Yes, Jivananda, you have a follow-up point?
Yeah, thanks, Gihan. Actually, this I want to elaborate the point that I made about lack of rational thinking as a result of our education system. Not only the education, our upbringing as children. I'm looking back at my childhood and realizing now that we were brought up to obey, believe the adults, believe what's in the book, believe what the priest tells you, and never question. Okay, that's an inherent, inbuilt part of the Buddhist culture. Okay, now I have been writing into papers about these things. I get into trouble, so I will continue to get into trouble. For example, the Buddha Charita. It's a poem, beautiful poem written by the Sanskrit writers 600, 800 years after Buddha's passing away. There's nothing about Buddha's life before he became enlightened in the Pali sutras. So, but we were told that poem as historical facts. And if we question, oh, really, did that happen? Oh, no, don't say that, Puta, you will go to Apaya. Okay, so we were brought up to follow whatever the adults say, the adults around us. So that is built into our psyche when we grow up also. For example, at the university, if the professor says something, you don't agree with it, but you don't question them. You just go home with that and reiterate at the exam. So like that, we need to, right from the beginning, we have to stop forcing children to not only the religion. I mean, there are so many belief systems in our culture, society. I mean, the list, I can write a book about it. Our belief systems. So we need to free our children from those belief systems and encourage them to think rationally. Then they can question, hey, when they grow up, then they can say, hey, there's a law of the country. Why is it not applied to the minister or minister's son or whatever, and fight against that? Unfortunately, we as a society, we don't have that spirit. So we may not be able to change it we may not be able to change the current generation, but at least, we should make a start and hope the future generations will be able to question the authority and change the society. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very, very valid, Jivananda. I mean, this critical thinking, an inquisitive mind, critical thinking, challenging the thoughts and ideas that are presented to them, rather than just taking them as things that they just have to comply with. That obedience that you mentioned. That again is societal, isn't it? I mean, these things have to be changed at education level, primary level, from a very young age. You need children to do that. I mean, I've noticed, I mean, there are two ends to this, of the spectrum. On the one hand, you don't want to have a bunch of sheep just following whatever they have to be being told to do. On the other hand, you also want polite, well brought up individuals who are courteous and so on and so forth. So it's getting the right balance at home level, school level, primary level, through to, and hopefully at university level, that they're a lot more challenging of the lecturers, and certainly critical thinking is key at university level especially, but certainly even from a young age. Anyone else? Ajit, let me just have a look at your comment. You're saying it is a complex issue. And stop calling girls putha, call them dua. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's right. I mean the even labels kind of matter. And when you've got young children, I think conditioning them into certain roles, it's a serious problem in Sri Lanka. I think it's the same everywhere in the world. But you know, there'd be very few parents who'd be buying a chemistry set or a science toy or something, or a motor car for their little girl, than you know, that they'd be giving that sort of gift to a boy. So, you know, so next time you buy a present for your grandchildren or your children, please do think about those things, because they do influence thinking later in life as well. But certainly schools have a big role to play. But I mean, as I think you mentioned the role of religion. And I take, I've only heard this anecdotally, so I don't know where this has come from, but I was told, for example, that there was a textbook on puberty that was banned because the Buddhist clergy wanted it banned. Now, this is a human biology textbook explaining puberty and periods and things like that to school children. Now, if you're kept in the dark about those basic biological changes, and then that leaves a whole generation of kids clueless about what's happening to them, that's quite serious and backward. So how do we change those attitudes that are imposed by the faith leaders, by society out there, by our parents and our grandparents? How do we change those things? Are there any other comments by anybody? Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? I think we've actually overrun a little bit as well, but if unless we've got any burning comments, we could probably call it a day now. Is that all right, or does anybody have anything else to add? Okay, well, let's just kind of wrap up now. Just a reminder, please do join in on the events on the 8th of March, Saturday the 8th of March, the bazaar at Harrow Baptist Church. Please come and please ask your friends and relatives to come along with you. If you have anything to donate for the sale as well, that'll be really welcome. Any new items for sale that we'd gratefully receive. So any unwanted Christmas gifts, plants, books, those are the sort of things that we're looking for. And please message me if you've got anything that's sitting in your garage, because we could use those to raise some funds for our developmental work in Sri Lanka, which we're trying to pilot through the Agamati School. And so there's also the online event on the 8th of March at 12:30, when we've got a really exciting panel of 5 ladies. We'll have a discussion, but prior to that, we'll have all the details of the 5 speakers on the Eventbrite page. And then also on the 15th of March, the APSL event. It's a in-person event at Imperial College, and that's in the afternoon, I believe 2 to 6 p.m. At Imperial College. So I hope you'll be able to join in all of those events, because they'll all center around the theme of female issues, and to celebrate International Women's Day. But as we discussed, we can't do it without the help of the boys. So come in great numbers, men and women, boys and girls, all. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll end there for today. Thank you very much, everybody.